Ed, Ed, and Eddy's Big Picture Show Fanfic. Read by Kappa. Chapter 1. The Eds stood, looking dumbfounded at the lane. Everything was quiet. It was so quiet that the only noise that they could actually hear was ants crawling all over an ice cream cone. Through his dazed, beat-up head, Kevin heard Eddy whispering. The second he painfully sat up, the dorks were nowhere in sight. This was the last straw. They were really in it for this time. Ed burst into his room with such force that he broke the whole door in. Eddy said that the scam would not put harm on anyone, but now look at what happened. He stuffed whatever else he could find into his bag. Before he left the room, the toast popped out of his toaster. There was no time to eat right now. The kids could be on his trail, or worse, they could already have Eddy and Ed. Ed burst through the window, only to catch Sarah and Jimmy's attention, who were making a pretend pirate film. Sarah rolled her eyes at her brother's, as usual, stupid antics, but she took notice of how panicked he looked. Were those all his sponges he was sending free into the sky? Those are his delicacies. Ed scrambled down the neighborhood as Sarah and Jimmy looked at one another. The two children heard Rolf scream along with Kevin. Oh, yeah, the Eds have done it this time. This one was no good either. His hands were so shaky that Ed could barely understand his own writing. As his belongings lay neatly all around his bed, in the corner of the room sat an upset sockhead, who couldn't leave without leaving his parents a note. He put the pen down. He couldn't form into words what just happened only a few moments ago. Eddy forced him to build this thing. All he wanted to do was test it before the kids came. But Eddy, oh, Eddy, why did he? Ed pulled himself out of his dark thoughts. He picked up the pen and continued to write. He was making it sound like if he murdered someone. But then again, there was a possibility that they did. His parents didn't want a child who murdered someone. They made it very clear when they moved here after the incident of what happened in his old school. Were his parents even going to read this? Would they even notice he was gone? It was like he didn't exist to them. What about time for family? This note was the worst of all of them. Ed bawled into his knees at the horrendous consequences that were coming. Just then, the door kicked off its latch. Oh no, was it Bubble Tea? Ed screamed, grabbing him by his shirt. Eddy crammed anything he could into one suitcase. He jumped up and down until he finally heard a click. The thing weighed as if it was an elephant. How could a whole bunch of clothes and magazines weigh so much? Luck wasn't with them, like it ever was, as the suitcase exploded its contents all over the room. How could this happen? He learned all he knew about scams from his brother. What did he forget that was missing? None of his brother's scams turned out this way. He'd get the big bucks and never fail. But then again, the last one was the final strike with his parents. Was he under its strikes too? Eddy broke out in a sweat when someone began pounding on his door. He had to act fast. Eddy grabbed the vacuum cleaner. My little Eddie's not home right now, he said, trying to impersonate his mother's voice. Ed bulldozed into the room. Without looking where he was going, he tripped on the vacuum and landed on an almost hysterical Eddy. It wasn't my fault, I swear, Eddy screamed. Before realizing it was only Ed, he resumed packing again, but had no idea what to stuff in it. What do we do, Eddy? What do we do? Ed yelled, with sweat flying across the room. Eddy ran in circles, finally noticed something missing. What happened to Soghead? He yelled. Did the kids already get him? Ed pulled a dazed Ed from his giant sock. He was covered in so much butter from all the garbage that was inside. Here, hold this, Eddie yelled, throwing his suitcase into Ed's arms. This finally snapped Ed out of his daze. We're fugitives, Eddie! Are you aware of the consequences that we're about to endure? All because of our misguided temerity? Before one of them could speak again, dark shadows moved along the window. They were coming. Too late! Quick! My brother's room! Eddie screamed, running into the hallway. It was the only room he could think that nobody would know that they were in. He knew it was a good hiding place, since he hid there when he was in trouble with his parents. They never cared to look there because they cared that the room never existed. The Ed screeched to a halt when the front door was being pummeled. Eddie shoved his friends upstairs and they ran. They ran like they never ran before the front door smashed against the wall. Ever so slowly, Eddie turned the knob and peeked inside the dark room. He hadn't been there for a year. Even then, it took guts to go in. This was where his brother took him to torment him, away from their parents because he could block off the sound. Was this right? Eddie, do you think this is wise? Ed asked him. They'll never find us in here. It was the only shot for them to get out alive. He worked up his courage and ran into the room. His friends followed, and the doors were locked up from the outside world.